But in process of time, even these honest and quiet people were exasperated. They were alienated from the prelates and their adherents for running down Mr. Baxter and those of his mind as deceivers. Repeating his sermons in their houses, they were laid in gaols with common malefactors. Their goods were seized, as they were fined and punished again and again. At length they were hardly more angry with the bishops than they were with Mr. Baxter himself, whom they censured upon his publishing the book called The Cure of Church Divisions, as strengthening the hands of persecutors by persuading them of the lawfulness of communicating in their parish church with a comfortable minister in the liturgy. But he still continued his care of them and concern for them, and at length he became capable of helping them to a valuable, useful man that would make it his business to promote serious religion among them. For Colonel John Bridges had sold the patronage of the living to Mr. Thomas Foley, upon condition that he should present Mr. Baxter next if he were capable of it, and if not, that he should present one with his consent. When the old vicar died, many thought that Mr. Baxter himself would have conformed. Archbishop Stern of York particularly bid the minister take it on his word that he conformed, and was gone to his beloved Kidderminster, but Mr. Baxter had no such thoughts, though he would gladly have assisted them in getting a suitable person. But the people there refused to have any hand in bringing in another minister into the church, lest they should seem to consent to his conformity or be obliged to own him in his office. They were not to be prevailed with to concur, and for that reason Mr. Baxter refused to meddle in the choice. When Mr. Foley had put in a valuable man to their minister, Mr. Baxter wrote to them to join with him in prayers and sacrament, and at a time when they had no opportunity for separate meetings, but their sufferings had so far alienated them from the church party that they would not yield that his letter should be so much as read among them. However, Mr. Baxter kept up a peculiar respect to them and concern for them as long as he lived. His works were various. Dr. Bates in his funeral sermon says that his books, for the number and variety of matter in them, make a library. They contain a treasure of controversial, casuistical, positive, and practical divinity. And the excellent Bishop Wilkins did not stick to say that he had cultivated every subject he handled. I will touch only upon those of his works that are here collected together in 4 volumes. The first volume contains his Christian Directory. The first part of it, which he calls Christian Ethics, is perhaps the best body of practical divinity that is extant in our own or any other tongue. And though in the ecclesiastical cases there are some things that are not to every man's gust, and no other could well be expected where there is so vast a variety, yet he that will have the patience to read through will find his pains rewarded by ample instruction. The second volume contains 1. The reasons of the Christian religion, which book hath revealed many when under temptations to infidelity. 2. The unreasonableness of infidelity, where a clear account is given of the nature of the witness of the Spirit to the truth of Christianity, and of the unpardonable sin committed in opposition to it. And a discourse is added about the arrogancy of reason in opposition to divine revelation, that is very proper for those who, being for freedom of thought, would know how to keep it within due bounds so as to prevent extravagance. 3. More reasons for the Christian religion, which contains a vindication of the Holy Scriptures from a charge of contradictions, and some animadversions on my Lord Herbert de Veritate. 4. His treatise of conversion, a set of plain sermons preached at Kidderminster explaining the nature and the necessity, the benefits and hindrances of a thorough change of heart and life. 5. A call to the unconverted, which has been blessed by God with marvelous success in reclaiming persons from their impiety. 6 brothers were once converted by reading it. 20,000 of them were printed and dispersed in little more than a year's time. It was translated into French and Dutch and other European languages, and Mr. Elliot translated it into the Indian language, and Mr. Cotton Mather gives gives an account of a certain Indian prince who was so affected with this book that he sat reading it with tears in his eyes till he died, not suffering it to be taken from him. 6. Now or never, in which all are seriously urged to improve the present time in order to a heartily return to God through Jesus Christ. 7. Directions and Persuasions to a Sound Conversion, a book that has been useful to many souls by preventing those mistakes in practical religion which are often fatal. 8. A Saint or a Brute, being some plain sermons preached to his people at Kidderminster concerning the necessity and excellency of holiness. 9. The mischiefs of self-ignorance and benefits of self-acquaintance, being some plain sermons preached at St. Dunstan's in Fleet Street to prevent persons from devouring others while they did not know themselves. 10. A Right Method for Settled Peace of Conscience, written for the benefit of a melancholy lady, a book by which many dejected Christians have been revived. 11. God's Goodness Vindicated, an essay to clear up that darling attribute of the deity about which melancholy persons often run into such unhappy mistakes. 12. Directions to weak Christians how to grow in grace with characters of a sound Christian, well worth the perusal of such as desire to have right and clear notions of Christianity. The third volume contains 1. The Saint's Everlasting Rest, a book written in a very languishing condition when in the suspense of life and death, and yet it has the signatures of a holy and vigorous mind. Multitudes will have cause to bless God forever for this book. Among others, Holy Mr. John Janeway was thereby converted. 2. A treatise of self-denial, in which nature and grounds of that capital part of our holy religion are opened and cleared. 3. Of crucifying the world by the cross of Christ, an affecting caveat against worldliness. 4. The Life of Faith, which was an enlargement of the sermon preached before King Charles II soon after his restoration. Though there are many things to be met with here that occur in his other writings, a thing not to be avoided in one that wrote so much, yet has the method in which there are here put together been advantageous to many. 5. The Divine Life, in which there are 3 treatises visibly of the knowledge of God, of walking with God, and of conversing with God in solitude, in which there is more solid and useful divinity than in some bulky volumes. 6. The Divine Appointment of the Lord's Day, written for the satisfaction of some that were inclined to the 7th-day Sabbath. 7. Obedient Patience. 8. His Dying Thoughts, in which, though there are some peculiarities and an account of some temptations that it is amazing that such a man as Mr. Baxter should be at all troubled with, there yet are some as noble thoughts as to the happiness of the saints departed, and as to our blessed Saviour's transfiguration, and the improvableness of it, as can easily be met with. The 4th and last volume contains 1. Compassionate Counsel to Young Men, which many have had cause to bless God for. 2. The Mother's Catechism, designed for instruction of children and for the assistance of mothers in discharging their duty in that respect. 3. Catechizing of Families, a plain manual familiarly opening the great essential of religion in a catechetical way. 4. The Poor Man's Family Book, a book that has been given away by many landlords to their tenants with good success. 5. Confirmation and Restoration, etc., being an essay to revive the true primitive discipline by bringing the baptized publicly to own their standing to the baptismal vow when they come to age, and proposing that such as fall into scandalous sins should be restored by a public profession of repentance. 6. Gildas Salvianus, or the Reformed Pastor, which perhaps contains the best model of a gospel minister that ever was published. We may indeed there meet with a free confession of ministerial faults, which confession some endeavored to turn to his reproach, but the confessing and amending real faults is a much more likely way to secure the honor of the sacred ministry than either a denying of them or a seeking to cloak, extenuate, or cover them.